So it might be big things we're just waiting for
I have one of my parts that my philosophy is I'm always not live that far from the car or the building. Generally, so I'm okay. My grandmother used to do it. Way too far.
I got a little group that I play with a lot in Miami.
Yeah.
And
That's part.
I became retired judge and yeah.
Oh, then that's cool. You're right. You're right.
His colleague Leonard Hansen named me and I played with him on Saturday. Pickleball.
So when I was up right there, you know how famous you are? You're everywhere. I'm still getting. You were in the whole JTA Weekly Sports Run. That's enough already. Enough.
International.
That's enough. Right, I get it. It's enough.
Yes.
That's sweet.
Well, yeah, but you know, I guess she did that, but party and then and multiple because it's also just like you know the reporter. The champ.
Listen, I'm 43, and I can tell you, that is exhausting. It's exhausting.
So I have to tell you my
No noise.
Steve knows.
There are rules behind.
Yeah,
The least they could have done for you. Well, that was
thank you.
That was one of those things where it just you felt so good. Like it's the attention.
You know, I was thank you.
If I may ask everyone to take their seats, the program will begin in 1 minute.
Yes, you have to sit there now. Your name? Try.
Like a 9-year-old.
Yes, I do. Well, Ursula's resisting too. She's sitting in the front row.
I'm gonna sit right next to it.
You're in the barber chair, Mike.
I'll put myself in.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's program, Lawyers Without Rights. It's connected to this exhibit that hopefully you've all had a chance to look at and could have a chance to look at afterward. My name's Carl Goodman. I'm the CEO of the Florida Holocaust Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here. I want to thank a few people who made this exhibit possible. First of all, Lawyers Without Rights. And by the way, this is a wonderful book with forewords by some luminaries, including Justice Stephen Breyer. And the American Bar Association Center for Global Programs deserves their thanks. Consul General Andreas Ziegel, Bill Choik, Roland Chase, Matt Mazes for their role in bringing this exhibit to the Florida Holocaust Museum. I want to thank Robin Warren just because she's here and a former board member. Hey. So I want to introduce tonight's moderator. He is co-chair of the museum's annual forum for attorneys. It's called Lawyers of Conscience. I highly recommend it. It has been one of the most preeminent programs here at the museum for many years. He's listed as among Tampa Bay's top lawyers by Tampa Bay Magazine. He's a recipient of the Richard T. Earl Professionalism Award, has a preeminent peer rating from Martindale-Hubbell, but he's also former chair of the Board of Overseers and board member of his alma mater, Stetson University College of Law, right here in the area. And among many other honors and accomplishments, was named a member of the legal elite by Florida Trend. Please welcome Josh Magidson.
Before I introduce some of the panelists and Bill Choik, I wanted to talk first. I'm here on behalf of Rachel Worthington. I think everybody in this room knows how important she is to this museum and how much she cares and gives, but she's in Vermont and would love to have been the moderator tonight. So I'm sitting in for Rachel, and I wanted to thank her for the opportunity. You'll find a very meaningful exhibit and wonderful guests that we have tonight. So we're all looking forward to it. I just wanted to give you a little bit about the Lawyers of Conscience. We've had several meetings since 2013. And what is the mission of it? The mission of the Florida Holocaust Museum Lawyers of Conscience is to provide a non-political forum in which to sponsor thought-provoking programs and discussions relating past atrocities and lessons of history to contemporary issues, and to encourage participation of lawyers with the museum in order to promote equality of rights and justice under law. It's to get our community of lawyers working with the Holocaust Museum and its programs, because I think, as you'll see from this exhibit and from our discussion, this is a very important and wonderful crossroads that we have here in St. Petersburg. Some of the programs that we've had before include, as you saw in the book, Benjamin Ferencz, who was one of the last living prosecutors at the Nuremberg trials, wrote a forward in the book, also gave a presentation here. We've also had Donald Burris. I think some of you had come to that for the Women in Gold. He was one of the lead attorneys of the United States Supreme Court to bring an action against the state of Austria to recover that painting on behalf of his client. We've had another wonderful program from Paul Lombardo, PhD professor, I think he's at Emory, who talked about the whole idea of eugenics. And that'll come up in some of our discussions as well, this whole idea of blood and how important it became in Germany. So just to give you, whatever you can do to get, if you know lawyers or you are a lawyer, we ask you to help and participate in these programs, but you're all welcome to them. And Rachel will certainly give word out to everybody about them. But first, I'd like to introduce a major figure in our program today and the Lawyers Without Rights, and that's Bill Choate. He's a long-term journalist. Bill has worked for the American Bar Association since 2010 and is now a senior strategist and writer in the Media Relations Division. He is also the U.S. coordinator of the ABA German Federal Bar Project, Lawyers Without Rights, the exhibits which bring us together today. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Bill to come up and say a few words.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you and the Florida Holocaust Museum for hosting this exhibit and tonight's program. You've been a really great partner, and I want to give special thanks to a special man, German Consul General Siegel and Honorary Consul Roland Chase, but for their interest and assistance. Consul General Siegel, by the way, has attended or participated now in less than 11 months, 7 of these events in, I think, 5 different venues. So thank you very much for being a great supporter. He is leaving in a few weeks, and we will miss him. I will miss him. I also want to acknowledge a few people that are here. Retired Judge Pete Evans from Palm Beach County has been a friend since college, a half century ago. Sadly, but that's true. And like any judge from the bench, he's kind of orchestrated a judicial conference, and a couple of his judicial buddies, Honorable David Demers is here, as well as Honorable Carl Gruby, who I think sat locally in the court. So thank you for coming. And of course, Pete's wife, Debbie, who actually showed me hospitality in West Palm in the last couple days. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not just a long-ago journalist, but we all appreciate that the Lawyers Without Rights exhibit provides a chilling reminder of why people of all goodwill stand united behind the rule of law and justice. The history of this exhibit, hopefully, reflects a great partnership between the ABA and the German Federal Bar, and so many venues, including this one now across the country. We joined together in 2012 with what the lawyers call an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the German Federal Bar, and we've been to more than 70 or so venues in the 11 years. For more information, you can go to www.lawyerswithoutrights.com. We are planning through 2024, so if you know of any venues outside the area, let friends who might want to bring it in, let me know. On that website, you can find my details. While we know much about the Holocaust, until this exhibit was put together by the Germans, people knew very little about the Third Reich's attacks upon its lawyers and judges, and how those attacks undermined the rule of law and permitted history's most monstrous outrage against humanity. This exhibit vividly and sadly reminds us that when lawyers, the judicial system, and the just rule of law are undermined, when abuses go unchecked and are permitted to flourish, great tragedy can happen, and that's what happened in Germany starting in 1933. Too many people, particularly non-Jewish lawyers in Germany, looked away. As Axel Filges, who was the former president of the German Federal Bar, has said, and he is instrumental in creating this exhibit 20 years ago, the non-Jewish lawyers of those days remained silent. They failed miserably, and so did the lawyer organizations. We don't know why. That is why it's important for lawyers, and really everybody, to speak up today. And that is why I'm particularly pleased that tonight's program focuses on Holocaust education and is tilted toward more younger audiences, lawyers and professionals. And I'm looking around, and frankly, I've been to many of these things, and this is perhaps the youngest audience that I've seen. So congratulations. In the panels behind you, you have a record of how the Nazis undermined the rule of law, replacing it by rule by law. Tragedy can follow when that happens, and it did. The phrase never again, which originated out of the Holocaust, has become a universal phrase. Tonight, we take a small but important step to remind people that when we say never again, we must follow through with actions. vigilance, and education. Thank you again for coming out, and thank the Florida Holocaust Museum for making tonight possible.
Okay, at this time, I'd ask the panelists to go ahead and take a seat up here, and then I'll introduce you after you get up. We do that. Pick a chair, any chair.
I told you that.
First, I'd like to introduce Consul General Andreas Siegel. Consul General Siegel is a career diplomat with a broad range of international experience in the strategic, political, economic, and cultural affairs. He holds both a postgraduate diploma of the College of Europe in Belgium, a master's degree of French, English, and American literature and linguistics at the University of Freiburg in Germany. Andreas has a long-time connection and affinity for the United States. He was an AFS exchange student in Michigan during the bicentennial year, 1976. In the early 90s, he served as vice consul at the German Consulate General in Boston, Massachusetts. Before coming to Florida in 2019, Consul General Siegel headed the German Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Before that, he was head of the Strategic Planning Division for External Cultural Policy in the Directorate General for Culture and Communication at the Federal Foreign Office, and has been steadfast in bringing this exhibit and working with us and with the ABA, and we appreciate everything he's done. Next, I'd like to introduce Ursula Suspenskia, is the Director in Education and Research here at the museum. Prior to joining the museum 17 years ago, she worked at the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw and at the State Museum at Majdanek, on site of the former concentration and death camp in Lublin, Poland. As the head of the Holocaust Museum's Education Department, Ursula is responsible for teacher, student, and community education, including docent-led tours for various audiences. Ursula teaches classes for educators and students at middle and high school and university levels. She conducts archival and historical research for Holocaust survivors, as well as for exhibitions and other projects of the Holocaust Museum. She has helped survivors discover their fate of their loved ones from whom they were separated during the Holocaust. She leads the Shoah Victims' Names Recovery Project here at the museum in cooperation with Yad Vashem, and received the 2011 Outstanding Achievement Award from the Florida Association of Museums for submitting over 700 pages of testimony from local survivors. In partnership with the Anti-Defamation League and the U.S. Holocaust Museum, she has been teaching the law enforcement and society lessons of the Holocaust program to police agencies throughout the state. So welcome. Next, Michael Eagle is a third-generation Holocaust survivor and chair of the Florida Commissioner of Education Task Force on Holocaust Education and the board chair here at the Florida Holocaust Museum. Professionally, he's a partner with the law firm of Johnson, Pope, Boker, Ruppel, and Burns. Welcome, Michael.
My mother wrote a longer one, but we didn't use it.
The last person is a very interesting friend of mine. I, as you heard, I was involved with Stetson Law School, and early one day there was a program of this exhibit at Stetson, and I was invited by the leader of the Jewish Student Association, and it was this fellow who invited me, and so we've become good friends. Patrick Ayempalai is an attorney and partner at Hale Law. He represents injury victims across the state of Florida and has been recognized with a multitude of awards and recognitions over the course of his career. He is a current member of the Young Jewish Adults Group in Sarasota, and he is a former Young Adult Division Board member of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County. While a student at Stetson University College of Law, Patrick served as president of the Jewish Law Student Association, and during his last year, recognizing its importance, he coordinated the Lawyers Without Rights, this exhibit, to be displayed at the Stetson Law Library. As a young professional, he brings a fresh perspective and strong belief in the power of understanding history to shape a better future. Welcome the whole panel. So I have a few questions I'm going to ask the panel, then we'll open it up to the audience for some other questions. But first, Counsel General, we're going to just ask everybody on the panel to answer this question. We're going to ask you to comment on the exhibition itself and the lessons we can learn from understanding the plight of Jewish attorneys under Nazi rule and how we can apply it to our lives today. Thank you.
Well, this is already a complex question. I'll start off, and I have very, very eminent experts here on my side who will add on. Well, for me, this exhibit is on the one hand very interesting and important because it shows facets and aspects of Jewish history and of legal history, which many people are not aware of. And insofar it is, some would call it a niche of history. But if you read some of the biographies of the of the lawyers, and I know the names of some families personally because they lived close to where I grew up in Berlin, you can recognize what impact these professional sort of interdictions at the time had for them, and that their families had to flee, had to emigrate. Very diverse biographies, as you can see when you look at that. But sort of in a nutshell, I would say it is important to deal with all the facets of history in order to comprehend the significance of what can happen afterwards, what they can trigger. And in this case, we're not talking about the period of the Holocaust as such. This exhibit covers the period between, let's say, early 1930s until Reichskristallnacht, maybe in 1938. But the Holocaust and the Wannsee Conference and so on, that was of course later. But it is closely linked, of course, to this story. And if we commemorate history, I think it is important to be aware of those beginnings, of the early signs and the early tipping points. And you cannot just exclude those from looking at history. So I always mention in this context, when we celebrate in Germany the 9th of November, we first think of the fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989, which is really a sentiment of joy, and which was followed by unification. But in Germany, very regularly and through institutions and even in civil society, we also think of the 9th of November 1938, which was the night of broken glass and the Kristallnacht. And we do also think of the 9th of November 1923, which was the failed beer hall putsch or coup by Adolf Hitler, who was going to be more known later on. And it's also the 9th of November 1918, which is the foundation actually of the Weimar Republic, which was sort of the first German democratic republic, but as we know, which failed for a number of reasons, which we may have time to talk about. And so we do have to deal with all these different facets in order to understand what his history actually means.
Okay.
Thank you.
You want to pass that down to Michael? Or?
I have to follow. That's not fair. So, what he said. No. So this is for me it almost sounds dramatic, but kind of a mind-blowing thing. So as an attorney, my day job is, I do a lot at the museum too. As an attorney who's the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, who's Jewish, it's almost like the perfect storm to look at, to see the exhibition. It covers so much of what we teach at the museum, or so I don't know if you noticed that as well, in terms of when we talk a lot about the lessons of the Holocaust and bringing them into everyday life, so we have more upstanders and we don't have bystanders. And there's been already a lot of discussion about the non-Jewish lawyers who were bystanders. And we focus on the bystanders, but we really try to shed so much light on the upstanders, and it's shrouded by the worst in humanity. And I just am thinking about all of those lessons that we talk about and we teach about. And it's particularly, you can't help but in some respects, place yourself there, especially again, as a practicing attorney. I'm just a boring transactional attorney. So, but still, it's a lot. I think it's a really, sort of emotional manifestation of, I always go back to what my grandparents said, it was the worst in humanity, but at the same time, you have to tell people it was the best in humanity. And I always, that's where my eye always goes. It's because of how I was raised. And so I think a lot about the power that was not only taken away, but that was exhibited by people every day, not only then, but now, how we have to focus and take those lessons and bring them forward. So because of, I think, particularly my upbringing, that's where my head goes when I see something like this. What can I do? What can I learn from this to make myself even more of an upstander every single day? And that's I think how the exhibition hits me. And I think it's like pitch perfect in that regard. I think it's an area that you not only do not think about, you didn't know about before you looked. And I think it's one of those things that makes you go, wow, this really hit every facet of society. And that's what it takes, is you need all of these ingredients to this soup to create this horror. And for some reason, I also thought, just last thing I'll mention is I thought, my father is a physician, and we just think about, licensed professionals, and my head happened to go to one of the main reasons my dad became a physician. He loves what he does. We can't get him to retire. But is because my grandparents had said they were the last to be impacted. And so they had said, we want you to become a doctor, because they were the least likely or the last ones to end up having their rights taken away or worse. And I'm even thinking about that as I'm looking at this, how you can't imagine how sort of people talk about the traumas in the next generations, but just the level of impact that everything has and had on the people that it happened to. I'm also thinking, this, what you read, it wasn't like a light switch where the war ended and all of a sudden everybody liked each other and the anti-Semitism was gone. It was there before, it was there after. And I think about that as well here, and how we continue to have to take steps every single day to combat it. So.
Great. Ursula?
So this exhibition, I'm sorry, this is all stuck up, teaches us and shows us how history impacts individual human beings. Those individual biographies are very powerful, and that's what we do at the Florida Holocaust Museum. We translate history into human lives. I encourage everybody to read those bios, and you can see how history or historical events designed by human beings against their fellow humans impacted those innocent people. At the museum, we use the definition of the Holocaust from the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., that gives the time frame of the Holocaust as starting in 1933 when the Nazis came to power, because the persecution, state-sponsored persecution of Jews started right away. And those steps led to violence in the gas chambers and mass shootings. So you can see those early steps that were taken against Jews, in this case against Jewish lawyers, and see how it escalated. When you look at some of the stories, I'm looking at the panels right now in the background. Elizabeth Kahn, the female lawyer who, when she was banned from practicing as a lawyer, she postponed emigration because she was taking care of her mother and her sister, and they ended up being deported to Kovno and killed in a massacre. When you think about Margarete Berendt, who was the first female lawyer in Prussia, and she managed to escape to New York, where she worked as a household help and a mail delivery person. Eventually, she went to law school, and at the age of 63, she practiced law again. Another lawyer, Rudolf Alden, who escaped to London with his wife and during World War II, German citizens were sent to internment camps in the UK as enemy aliens. Meanwhile, he got a job offer from New York, and he was reluctant to accept it because he wanted to continue to live in the UK, but he accepted the job offer. He boarded the ship with his wife to start that new chapter of life, and that ship got torpedoed by a German U-boat, and they got killed. All those lives, and so many others, so many more that you can read about in the book, were destroyed, were turned upside down. Those who managed to escape and those who survived were still struggling to start a new life. And so many others lost their lives just because they were Jewish. They were innocent human beings. You can read in the bios how they were helping those who were oppressed when they could still practice the law.
Patrick?
First of all, thank you to the museum for having us. Thank you, Josh, for that introduction. I'm going to echo my esteemed colleagues here. When I see this exhibit that I've now seen for 7 years, I think of three things. I think of vigilance, I think of advocacy, and persistence. And I don't mean just for lawyers who, one of my closest friends, God rest his soul, Steve Cozy, who was still away from us, he said, as lawyers, we're people first, and to always remember that. And, I think I can speak for my fellow lawyer up here and saying that we're people first, and I think all people should be vigilant, should be advocates, and to also persist when faced with everything that these lawyers faced, because I think it all applies to today. It's kind of why I'm here. I'm the young guy to tie it all into the present. And I think we can all be vigilant in changing laws, in wrong things happening around us and speaking out. When we see that, and that goes right into the advocacy part. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a judge. Of course, we're doing our part in the courtroom as a lawyer and judges, and sometimes overturning bad law that's unconstitutional, that's passed, that's dangerous, that can lead to some really, really horrific things. They can all advocate, and so can anyone else. And finally, to persist. So when bad things do happen, when bad laws are enacted, we can all persist. That's fighting the good fight in the courtroom. That's also fighting the good fight wherever we can. Some upstanders really fought a good fight, and even silently, right? Even when no one else was noticing. Some lawyers pivoted, survivors pivoted and persisted, and it was certainly not probably the first choice for them to change countries, change professions, right? But they persisted. So that's what speaks to me about this exhibit.
Good. I think at this point, maybe Ursula, if you could give us a little bit of a background of Germany and Consul General too. What did these Jewish lawyers face? You talked about, Hitler as a chancellor taking over in 1933. Maybe you could talk about it in terms of, Mein Kampf, the Germans, even after World War I, what they thought of Jewish people. Because I think in the Weimar Republic, you actually had an increase in Jewish lawyers and women became lawyers. So if you can give us some more background about what it was like to be Jewish, and especially a Jewish lawyer in the, after between the two wars, and especially after Hitler took over.
So first of all, we have to remember that Hitler was appointed chancellor after the first attempt to take over power. He learned that it did not work out. So he was trying to gather enough support politically among voters. The Nazi Party never won the majority of votes in the parliament, but they won enough votes to be a party that was on the political scene and considered on the political scene as a partner. So he was appointed chancellor in January of 1933, and when you think about that, so many challenges in Germany at the time, and yet the anti-Semitic campaign started right away, sponsored by the government, encouraged by the government. So Jews were persecuted from the very beginning, with anti-Jewish laws being passed against Jews in broad daylight, hundreds of laws. And some of those laws impacted Jewish lawyers who were banned from practicing law. First, there was a division depending on when they became lawyers. Some World War I veterans were exempt, but then in 1938, all Jewish lawyers were banned, and even when they were not, their lives as Jewish people was impacted by what was going on around them. You can see images in this exhibition where you have names of Jewish lawyers covered up with the word Jude, Jew in German. And again, we're talking about these things happening in broad daylight, and very few people having the courage to stand up. Sure, there was resistance, and there were rescuers later on during the final solution, but the majority of Jewish victims had no one to turn to for help. Somebody talked earlier about the silence of non-Jewish lawyers, and that's one of the symbols that Jews were left without anyone to turn to for help.
Yeah, can we just, one of the points that comes up is this idea that there was no, laws were passed, things just happened. Give us a feel for just Germans' view of a Jewish person. I think the idea that, what was it that they were segregated, especially in the law, where they were just in the you had this big change, because in the Weimar Republic, they were lifted up to be put in a position equal to, but it was quick, it seems to me. So there must have been something else going on than just passing a law.
So historically, Jews have been persecuted for centuries, and Mike mentioned that the anti-Semitism did not end with the end of the Holocaust. It continues to today, and I'm sure we'll discuss it more later. Just last year, according to the survey released by the Anti-Defamation League, in every single state there were anti-Semitic incidents, and obviously it's a big issue worldwide. Going back to the history, Jews were often perceived as the other because of their religion, because of following their religion. And as for Germany, the majority of German Jews were assimilated and acculturated. So they felt part of the German society. They felt German first, Jewish second. Many of them fought for Germany in World War I. Many of them lost their lives in World War I for Germany, for their home country. And yet they were perceived as the other. The rumors and anti-Jewish propaganda started to circulate, misinformation and conspiracy theories that Jews contributed to the loss of World War I on the side of Germany, the stab in the back theory, and Jews were being singled out as the enemy. The Nazis openly called Jews the enemy. You can look at some of the images in this exhibition and in our core exhibition downstairs, how Jews were being pushed out in broad daylight from the society, including by German police who were no longer serving and protecting Jews in their hometowns. Eventually, Jews were stripped of their citizenship. As somebody mentioned here, I think you mentioned that it was very hard to leave because it's hard to leave your life behind and start from scratch. especially when you have family. How do you start? Where do you go? So many of those decisions were heartbreaking when people were deliberating, should they leave? Will it get worse? Obviously, people had no idea what will come next, but that was a daily reality for Jewish people, including Jewish lawyers at that time, that anti-Jewish propaganda, physical assaults, verbal assaults. We have to remember that every genocide starts with words and thoughts and misconceptions, and the last phase is violence, but it's like a slippery slope with steps along that slope. So we can see it in Germany, how it developed and deteriorated for German Jews.
Consul General, can we get you to talk about what you think was happening in Germany in the sense of things that we should be on the lookout for today? What happened in Germany? What were some of the signs that maybe people missed, or what? I guess what I'm looking for is, in Germany there are education programs too. What do those programs focus on to actually change thoughts, behaviors, to change how people would react today if we had some similar events?
Well, first to complement a little bit what Ursula said, I mean, to understand this, indeed, anti-Semitism is a century-old phenomenon, and today in Germany we have a debate, for example, about a figure which you can find at several cathedrals still in Germany, which depicts actually a pig or a Jewish or sort of an anti-Semitic drawing of a Jewish face with a pig, in connection with a pig, which is well, very horrible to look at, and in particular, of course, for Jewish. And there's the big discussion in Germany on how to deal with these, because they are part of historical buildings, and they are well, like in the 15th century or 14th century old. And some have decided to put explanatory notes of what this means and why it is still there. Others are saying, "Oh, this should be in a museum and should never be there for the public eye to be viewed at the place where it usually was." I am a part of those who would rather argue in favor of leaving it where it is and putting a very clear explanation and also a criticism, of course, of that there. But this to say that the Weimar Republic actually was not a real breaking point in German history. It actually was a continuity of militarism. People did not understand what democracy actually was, except for a couple of them. And that's why it was a dead-born child right from the beginning, with the crises, the hyperinflation, and then sort of this fake recovery and blossoming, the roaring 20s, which followed. But that was sort of, as it turned out, an illusion, because people just didn't realize that the world had developed and that democracy had to be fought for every day. And that's why these moments of between January and March 1933 are so crucial to look at. When Hitler was nominated chancellor, he was this was not something which was the president was not obligated to do that. He did not have a parliamentary majority at the time, so he was a minority chancellor. But this was due to a complacency by sort of economic circles and industry and the middle classes to think that all the others in industry will sort of tame him in some respect, which, as we know, was not the case, because immediately after he was nominated, and people are still argue whether the Nazis had something to do with it, the Reichstag, the parliament, was set on fire. Which actually provoked a huge action of sanctions, of arrests, of persecutions. More than several thousand people were arrested at that time. And Hitler prepared, shortly after, the so-called Enabling Act, which abolished virtually all parliamentary powers and put all the powers into the executive branch of government. And in a year later, in 1934, when he established the Führerprinzip, which means sort of what he said and thought was above the law. And if we are saying, well, we really have to pay attention for saying rule by law and rule of law. You can have any kind of law, but if it doesn't respect certain fundamental principles, it is not worth it. And that's also the founding fathers of the German Federal Republic after World War II put a very essential overarching principle into the Constitution, which is the principle of human dignity, that everything violating human dignity was automatically illegal. And therefore, of course, derived from that all the human rights principles and so on. One of the key analyses also of the failure of the Weimar Republic is that the emergency law provisions that the executive could declare relatively easily an emergency situation and put all democratic procedures sort of out of practice, and that this is no more possible in Germany. It is very difficult to declare a state of emergency now in Germany. And Parliament has to play a key role in that. Again, the Constitution, as I said, the human rights principles and the human dignity are fundamental change, and the equilibrium, the balance of power between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch is also is carved out in a very, very sensitive and very as many analysts say, very good balanced manner, so that these errors and systemic failures of the Weimar Republic at least cannot happen again.
Good. One before I get into I wanted Patrick. I'd like for you to talk or comment about, you're a law student, now you're an attorney. From the bar, being an attorney and being bound by the rules, the ethical rules and things like that, what have you learned or have, if anything, about what happened in Germany in looking in from as a lawyer as a member of the bar, what you would see would be things that we should be on the lookout for maybe as lawyers, in terms of the regulation of lawyers, in terms of what kind of behavior, what about if a law were passed today by the state of Florida that said, we're going to deregulate and only allow certain people to become lawyers, not others. I mean, what are some of the things that you've learned about the practice of law and the duties and responsibilities you have as a lawyer to the whole judicial system?
It's a great question, Josh. And I know you're the First Amendment expert, so I'm going to try to stay outside of that expertise and kind of just talk about my own experience there. I think the Florida bar does a lot to make sure that those who have the privilege to practice law are mentally fit, are not under the influence of drugs and alcohol and the addictions associated with those, because we have a duty to people. I'm a civil lawyer, so I'm only dealing with people's monies, but let's face facts, that can be someone's life, right? Money, and life are tied together. And then you have criminal lawyers who very much are dealing with people's actual lives. And then you have administrative lawyers who are construing law that does affect all of us. And I guess all three different kinds of lawyers, in America versus Germany, to my understanding, we have case law. So instead of just the legislature enacting the law, we as lawyers create new law. Judges create new law. So we've got a lot of responsibility here, We always try to make sure that, if there's precedent, we're following precedent. If new laws to be created, There's good standing for that, good principles, and those are all protections. The Florida bar, precedents, legislature, because while we could create new law, the legislature could come right around and say, nope, we're not doing it that way anymore. So I believe we have a very, very good system of law here, and that should help protect us, and be a good system of checks and balances should some bad law arise.
Michael, can you talk about it also?
Yeah.
I know you're doing a statewide Holocaust education program too.
Sure, but I want to touch on that as a lawyer first.
Sure.
I think sort of the end of your question was, sort of what do you think the reaction would be if a law was passed saying that a certain segment of society was not eligible to take the bar or be a licensed attorney. There are some people, I know the three of us have come across, we think, how the hell did he pass the bar? But leaving those aside, okay, we've all been around them. But whether you're a transactional attorney like I am or litigator like you guys, our job, and this is real, like we take this very seriously, is to be zealous advocates for our clients. We really, I tell people a lot, my job is to care but not be emotional, because if I get emotional, it clouds my ability to guide the client. So we're supposed to represent zealously members of our community, whether that is anywhere throughout the state, the country. That's our job. And so we are representatives of not only of the sort of the court and the law, but of our community. And so I believe that if that was even attempted, at least the civilized members of society, who are the ones I think about, the civilized members of the bar, would create a massive uproar and say, no, we're not going for that. Because I think it goes against the very fabric of sort of who and what we are as attorneys. Now, I'm not suggesting, we live in the gray. That's the way the world works. So I'm not suggesting that would be everyone. That's why I qualify that by saying the civilized members of the bar would say that's not the type of, that's not what I want to see of my ilk. I don't want to be part of a group that is excluding people based on who they are. And so that's my reaction to that particular question. I can't think of somebody who would want to stay quiet about that, and I feel good about that. So that's sort of my reaction to that. I think you're also asking from a statewide.
And the reason I wanted to tie it in is because you're involved statewide through the education. There's a Holocaust education program in the state of Florida, and obviously we as lawyers went through K through 12 and then into college and where do you see the best place to intervene or be involved in the Holocaust and making people aware? And do you see it having an impact in changing people's behaviors or their vision of life and how things are?
To answer the last part first, 100% does it change people. I think Ursula will tell you, I know Aaron Blankenship's here, Carl, I know they're second generation and third generation people here. We can all attest to tons of examples of interacting with people who we change. It's actually, I would say, can I speak for everyone, say it's the best part of the work, is seeing the impact and feeling the impact. And then sometimes it's the feedback you get, and sometimes it's just what you see. My niece just had her bat mitzvah. She's the first of the fourth generation to have a bat mitzvah, and that's a miracle. And before we left, my whole family lives up in New York, and my sister-in-law is a teacher in New Jersey. And before we left, because I can't even go to a family event without somehow bringing the museum into the fray, but. I went to speak to, she's a seventh grade teacher, and I went to speak to the seventh grade at her school in New Jersey. And my wife was yanking me to the airport when we were done. And, but I just got in the mail a huge batch of thank you notes from the kids. And reading what they had to say, it just lifts you up. Because, and just was it 2 weeks ago, I think, we had the Anne Frank Humanitarian Awards here. And that is something we do every year, that if you ever feel down about the world or humanity, come to the Anne Frank Humanitarian Awards banquet. We have it's, as it grows, so now it's 2 nights because we don't have enough room, you know, and it's 6 counties now, 5 counties now. And these resumes, no matter how hard you work, will make you feel lazy, what these students are doing. It's incredible. And that's the impact that we're having. So there's no doubt, I'm leaving aside the statistics that are out there about Holocaust education and the positive impact that it has. So there's data out there. That's there. Going beyond that, from personal experience, and I always make clear, you know, anti-Semitism isn't just a Jewish problem. It takes everybody to fight back against it. And when people, this is not a Jewish museum or Jewish institution. We use the lessons of the Holocaust to teach. That's our lens. But I always say to people, it's not as if someone walks in here and walks out and says, well, I just learned to be really nice to Jewish people, but thankfully I can still be mean to black people and gay people. That's not what happens. They take these lessons and they become upstanders. And there's so many examples of it. That's why it's important. When there's an age appropriateness to that every, you know, that's why we have experts like Ursula who can guide. You know, I know my family story, for example, she has blessed for 6th grade and above. But if I speak to students who are younger, I just remove certain particularly difficult pieces of information because you can still get the lessons out. So with age appropriateness, in many respects, you can't start too soon. I want to emphasize with age appropriateness, you talk about the extermination of people based on who they were to a 5-year-old. But there are lessons you can pluck out about humanity and about doing good things that should start, you know, based on the first memory of a child. Those are great things to teach. You know, my grandfather used to say, you know, you always hope that any child is taught, be nice to everyone. You know, that's like a great, but as I've gotten older, I realized that my grandfather used to say to my brother and me, you know, with his accent, he'd say, you treat the janitor like you treat the CEO. And I get older and I realize, man, how important was it to him to make sure we became people who were that way? That wasn't just a line to him after what my family went through. And so that's why these lessons, you know, if we limit it to books and numbers and dates, that Ursula started out by talking about how we use individual stories to teach. That goes beyond the numbers. That's where the education comes into play, and that's where it gets real, and that's why it's so effective.
Can we have Ursula talk about what, from her perspective?
Sure. So just like Mike said, we try to teach through personal stories. We teach accurate history based on the latest research. So we don't use fiction at the museum. It's always factual stories, but we translate that history into individual lives, and we can see that that's what makes impact on students and on adults. And we interact with Holocaust survivors. There are so few Holocaust survivors left. We've just celebrated 100th birthday of Helen Kahan. Her daughter is in the audience. What an incredible experience and privilege for all of us to be able to learn from Helen, who survived Auschwitz-Birkenau. And she managed to overcome so many obstacles in her life afterwards as well. She is a source of inspiration to us, just as other survivors are. And then we have 2nd generation, 3rd generation, 4th generation, children, grandchildren, etc., of Holocaust survivors, continuing to share those authentic stories. And it was said at the beginning that we have to turn never again into actions. And from our perspective at the museum, you have to provide education to inspire those actions. And that's why we start with students. We have resources that are age appropriate, grade appropriate, as Mike said, from kindergarten through grade 12 and university level. We bring adults here to the museum as well. We mentioned law enforcement earlier, and other groups, obviously lawyers. So it's our duty at the Florida Holocaust Museum to carry on the legacy of survivors and educate our audiences. I also want to mention a very important part of what we do that's very crucial to me. that's retrieving identities of those who perished. Sometimes these are names that were unknown before and stories of what happened to those individuals. Sometimes these are names that were known, but the larger audience did not know about them, like in this exhibition that we are discussing today. So it's very important to make sure that those individual stories are not forgotten, and each of us carries their responsibility to make sure that those stories are passed on. So
It's funny you should say that, because about 4 years ago, I was looking through my parents' photo album. I think I've told you the story. And there's a photograph of 3 men, and it turns out one is and a woman. It was in the back is like a postcard. And on the back of the postcard, it says Liebau, which is the name of the town, 1931, and it's a photograph. My dad's dead, my mom's dead. I don't have anybody to ask who these people are. I had no idea who these people are. I get an email from a woman who is a professor at Auburn University. Her name is Chris Schnitka. Chris Schnitka is a professor of science education for high school teachers and college educators. It turns out she was in Washington, D.C. for a conference, and the conference was getting delayed, so she went to the Holocaust Museum. She is the great-granddaughter of a woman who is the sister of my grandfather. I didn't even know this woman existed, but she learned, and she starts doing research on our family and finds me and my cousins. So we get together and I show her this picture, and she's one of the most incredible researchers I've ever met. And she takes the picture, and we find that it's a brother of her great-grandmother and a brother of my grandfather's children, taken in 1931 in a place called Liebau, which was the German pronunciation of Libava, which is a town on the Baltic Sea in Latvia. That part of my family was in the mercantile business, textiles. And in 1941, as you know, prior to 1941, Russia and Germany basically took over Poland in 1939, but the Russians took over the eastern half, including the Baltic states. And some of their family was taken away by the Russians, but these people remained. And when the Nazis came and invaded Russia in June of 1941, they went immediately into the Baltic states and basically got every Jew out of this town, lined them up, and shot them in a big mass grave. And the reason we know that it actually occurred because there were Nazi photographers. This is one of the few sites of a video or of a moving picture of the slaughter of these people. And these are the 3 people, and she has identified them as David, Avram, and Moshe Magidson. I have a brother named David Magidson. And to know that these people have been in that photo album, and as you said, Ursula, they never existed. These people are they're just out there. People who lived lives, had children, families, and they're gone. But I was able, through this photograph and through people, and I hope through your education program, that we never forget these people, because as long as and by the way, that photograph is downstairs on the wall, right next to the cattle car. But as long as we now have names and identities of these people, and they will live forever, because I'll make sure that my children and their grandchildren will know about these people and that they existed. So I couldn't say more about how much important it was for me.
And just to add one piece there, because it's a kind of a personification, just to kind of wrap up to your question, is we talk a lot about students, because we, at the museum, we do a tremendous amount of work with the Department of Education, and at the task force level, we support the Commissioner of Education as it relates to Holocaust education. And, so we talk a lot about schools and the next generation. But one way of looking at it is you're never, and you just kind of personified it, Josh, you're never too young or too old. I don't want to overgeneralize or simplify what we do here, because it's really complicated and emotional, but you're never too young or too old to learn how to be an upstander, how to be a bystander, which you hope you don't learn, but what it takes to be an upstander, bystander, victim, or perpetrator. You can teach that. I don't want to leave us as adults out of this. You're all here tonight. I'm hoping that that some of that's coming out. So, we're never off the hook, but it's never too early to teach these important lessons as well.
I agree. And I want to leave some time for the audience, but I have one question we can just go down the line with. Every day we hear about new anti-Semitic incidences here in the United States. In fact, in 2022, the ADL reported there were 3,697 anti-Semitic incidents in the United States, which is a 36% increase from 2017. Do you think we are in danger here in the United States of repeating history? I'll just start with the Consul General and work our way down.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that that one has to be vigilant, and anti-Semitism does exist in many countries of the world, unfortunately, including in Germany. Even though we have a 1,700 years tradition of Jewish life in Germany, which unfortunately is sort of phased out by the Holocaust that happened, but today we have a vibrant Jewish community in Germany, and I'm very glad about that. One particular sort of institutional innovation which we did in Germany was to nominate independent commissioners against anti-Semitism. So there's one on the federal level, and then there are also equivalent commissioners at the Länder level, the different state levels. And we now do have a national strategy against anti-Semitism and for Jewish life. That's exactly the formulation how it is put into practice and conceived by this federal commissioner. So yes, definitely, this is like democracy. You have to fight for it every day, or in that case, against anti-Semitism.
Okay, Michael, let's just go down the line.
Sure. And, that survey that you mentioned, of all of the statistics in it, the one that alarmed me the most was actually that 1 in 5 people holds some form of anti-Semitic belief. To me, that was the scariest, because that's your neighbor, that's your friend who holds the innocent anti-Semitic belief about Jews and their money, and all of these things, again, are part of that soup. So horrible statistics, and they're getting worse. I would agree, and we've had experts here who've tackled that on that question: are we headed towards? So I'm going to follow the experts, and I also believe this. I've thought a lot about this question, because I do think it's a great one. If the question is, are we nearing or headed toward the state-sponsored genocide of the Jewish people in the United States, I don't see that we're there. And again, I'm not an expert, but I understand why they're saying that. But I don't think that needs to be the question. I think the trial for the Pittsburgh shooter who shot up a synagogue, the Tree of Life synagogue in Squirrel Hill, started a couple of days ago, this week.
Right.
Go ask the members of that congregation and the family members and most Jewish people whether that should be the threshold for whether action needs to be taken every single day. I wear a Magen David, a Jewish star. I sometimes put it inside my shirt depending on where I am. Why should that be okay? It doesn't have to reach towards the systematic genocide of people in order for this to be a major problem. And so I think we need to look at that, especially in a place like America, that we have so much to be thankful for that we live here. My grandparents made that very clear to us as well. So this is an exceptionally complicated question and very nuanced. And it's one of those ones where you use the phrase, all of those things are true. I don't want us to get away from how lucky we are to live in a place where we can say how we feel. This is still a wonderful country to live in. And I'm bringing both of those things into the equation. It's not okay what's happening with anti-Semitism here, and it need not reach state-sponsored genocide in order to be fought by everyone in the community. I exist because non-Jewish people took action and were executed for what they did, and they never gave up where my grandparents live. So I know exactly what it's like to feel what happens when people do amazing things and do the right thing when they don't have to. That's why I do it. And one of the things I'm taking away was something Ursula said right at the beginning about the exhibition, to bring it back there, is people who, even though they were oppressed, were helping the oppressed. And they were helping the oppressed who weren't necessarily of the same group that they were part of. That's a huge takeaway from this, that no matter what was going on around them, they're having their rights stripped from them, they're facing death, and they were still trying to better the world for other people. Wow. I mean, what a lesson in that.
Thank you. Ursula?
I would just add that Holocaust history teaches us the importance of choices, personal choices we all make every day. And as I said earlier, genocide doesn't start with violence. It ends with violence. But it starts with words, thoughts, misconceptions, stereotypes, prejudice, and how we perceive ourselves, people around us, and people thousands of miles away from us. So that's one of the biggest lessons for all of us, to stop for a second and think, okay, what's my perception of that person or these people or what I've heard on the news? Because our choices matter, and how we treat ourselves and other people is very important. And we can change our perceptions. That's, I think, what Mike said earlier, that it's not set in stone that if we have certain views, we can't do better. We can. That's why we have education. And we need to remember the silence and the indifference during the Holocaust. And with all those loud anti-Semitic voices that we hear and read daily in the United States and elsewhere around the world, we need to have more voices against anti-Semitism. And again, freedom of speech is a wonderful privilege, but it's also a huge responsibility. And we each need to be taking this responsibility very seriously.
Thank you. Patrick, before we open it up.
I'm going to echo my esteemed colleagues, everything they said. But I do believe that the love outshines the hate. It's the hate rhetoric. I think we can all agree that helped Hitler and those around him rise in popularity and rise to power. I do believe that America's not going to get there, but we do see a lot of hate. It's very easy for it to spew nowadays on social media and all those free news outlets. But I do believe there's a lot of love there too. Kanye West lost billions of dollars on some really terrible things he said. And then you got my Miami Heat, go Heat in these in these finals now. But they, kicked the player off the team just by using one Jewish, anti-Semitic slur over a video game. There's a lot of people taking action. And I don't just mean, billion-dollar corporations, and professional sporting teams. I do mean young people as well. I'll just echo what Bill said. I see a lot of young people in the audience tonight. I work with a lot of young people at my firm. Most of my staff, I think, are Gen Zers. They're very passionate people. They call out what they see is wrong. They have loving beliefs. They want to listen. They want to learn. They don't want to make assumptions. And I think I see that happening. I really do across the country. Gives me a lot of positivity about the future. And even our AI, right? ChatGPT. You try to ask it to, make up some hate speech. It refuses to do so. I think that's kind of cool too. I think AI technology, social media, that's the future of speech and culture and education. I think things are looking bright for us and all of that.
How much time do you want for the Q&A? I don't know. 10 minutes. Okay. Let's, if you want to raise your hand, we're going to walk around with a mic. If you could stand up and just ask the question of the panel as a whole, or pick out who you would like.
Thank you so much. First of all, the panelists, you are incredible, amazing. Big applause to you. thank you so very much for sharing everything you have tonight. As a Hispanic woman, a lawyer, and the mother of a rabbi, thank you very much. That was hard work. One of the things that really strikes me about the conversation that we've had tonight is that, as you said very well, we don't have to wait until the moment of, oh, gee, are we at the precipice of genocide before we start to ask the questions. And as lawyers, one of the things that really concerns me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, is that our legislators, many of them are members of the Florida bar. There are lots and lots of lawyers passing anti-DEI, anti-education, anti-woke, anti-diversity, anti-otherness kind of legislation, and we, the lawyers in this state, are being very polite about it and waiting for the rule of law to sort of take care of the rule by law that is being perpetuated upon us. Would you suggest that we are now at the precipice of what we saw that happened in Germany, where a minority kind of voice ended up taking over an opportunity and a moment when we might have been able to be more vocal so that we could avoid the kinds of things that we saw at the Tree of Life and that I fear every day as the mother of a rabbi who goes into a synagogue? Thank you.
Patrick?
I'll say I was just up in Tallahassee this past session a lot for a lot of the tort reform legislation. And what I learned, it was my first time kind of getting involved in the legislative process, was that a lot of things were top down. A lot of things that you were talking about, I believe, were also top down. A lot of people fall in line, a lot of good lawyers up there that are serving people and do good in their community were voted to represent them. They just kind of follow orders, and it's sad and it's disheartening. It's not it right. And so what I think, we should all focus on if we want to make some positive change is talking to the top and kind of, using your power, using your votes, using your voices, and speaking to the top. The representatives, they'll always take your call. Your representatives will always take your calls. Or if you go to Tallahassee, they'll take a meeting with you because you're a constituent. Your vote definitely matters to them. I'm a little disheartened after going up there, though. I think you're really going to go, you gotta go talk to the top.
Michael?
Just to set some context and remind everybody, none of us up here are, we're here to, we're not politicians. So it's a great question to ask. All we can do is give, I'm a lawyer, he's a lawyer. Like we're not up there. I just want to kind of set some context here. We have our personal views and I'm sure we do. And I'm a moderate. So I just want to remind everybody of that. We're not, we're not even the messengers. So I wouldn't say don't shoot the messengers. We're here to talk about the exhibition. That said, I would largely echo, that's what an upstander does, is standing up for what you believe in. I'm going to keep going back to that. And I don't mean for it to sound trite. I hope it doesn't. I truly believe in this because of what my family went through. And so it doesn't need to be the people who were executed for hiding my grandparents. I always tell people that if you don't get practice on the small things, you won't be ready for the big ones when it comes to being the type of person who makes their voice heard and does the right thing regardless of circumstance. So whatever you believe that is, and that's not taking, I'm not taking a position on, I'm avoiding it intentionally because I don't matter beyond being a person just like you are or anybody else is in this, is making that noise, galvanizing like-minded people. Make the difference. Be frustrated, but but use more than your words. It takes action. It's easy to talk, but we have to step up and take action. You know, whatever that is in any that I'm not speaking to a particular item. That's the lesson from the Holocaust. Whatever you believe in, people, these are important topics to discuss. We field this a lot at the museum. I also want to be extremely careful about equivalencies, because we spend a lot of time here helping people understand that there are lots of problems in the world, and not all of them are to be intentionally or unintentionally compared to the Holocaust. That is disrespectful to the Holocaust and the victims and the survivors, as well as to the issue that somebody's trying to compare, because it can be horrible on its own. And we need to remember that too. So it's a great question. It's a fair question. It's an extremely complicated question.
Can I just comment as an observer who cannot call my congressman because I'm not here, but I can call. And I talk to them as well. But I would just give you a few examples where I think the sort of the saying "beware of the beginnings" is important to notice. Now, if you are a believer in the separation of the branches of government, for example, you should be a little bit worried when you hear politicians from both sides of the aisle priding themselves in being able to nominate a certain number of judges of a certain political color. That should not be officially a policy, because judges should be independent as far as I'm concerned. So that for me would be a reason to call my congressman. Another reason I would have called, and I would have called a number of times, is, for example, if you're here in Florida, you've observed that closely, the process of redistricting. If you remember well, there was a necessity to redistrict the electoral districts because of the census, and there was a common position and a common proposal from both sides of the aisle prepared by the two chambers or in the House of Representatives. That was refused by the executive, by the governor, who finally ended up in drawing up a new legislative map himself. Now, is that sort of an idea of the founding fathers, that the executive branch should conceive how the electoral districts are being drawn up? I don't think so. And if someone who is in the executive position and who is sort of up for election, and after the election calls people who are operatively involved in counting and professionally involved in counting the election, and asking them to find votes somewhere. Now that for me is totally unacceptable, as much as if I hear a candidate 4 months before the election claim that the only way he can lose the election is if the others are fraudulent. Now that is a fundamentally undemocratic attitude, and I would call the congressman who I am, if I could. So these are just a few examples as an observer.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to do one. I think this fellow has a question, and then that'll be our last question, because I know people have things to do.
Thank you for doing this. We really appreciate all you guys coming over here. But I have a question for you. We all agree that education is very important. Florida is a leader in the state in Holocaust education. But I am unclear what the monitoring is to enforce the laws that are asking our kids to get the kids in Florida to be educated. So that's the first thing. Quick two-part question. It's the first thing I want.
Another lawyer. No.
Yes. And then the other one is somewhat an answer to what's going on, but I know here in St. Pete, you probably heard that we recently had a member elected to the council, St. Pete City Council, who is a member of a fan of Louis Farrakhan, who is anti-Jewish, anti-gay, and there was a tremendous, at least from our circuit, when I'm part of the Federation, we've tried to fight against that, and in fighting against that, we found that the council members had no idea what anti-Semitism was. And so the education needs to happen, not only the the younger generation, but we've got a problem now, today, with the current leaders in Congress, in legislature, and in councils, and that education needs to go forward too. And
Sure. I can try to touch both of those, having been intimately involved in both. So, speaking from a sort of a task force chair perspective, which again, to be clear, exists to support the Department of Education in Holocaust education. So I'm not, that is not, there's nothing beyond that in our job. We help, it's a, I'll call it narrow, but extremely important lane. Ursula's on the task force as well. And it consists largely of education, Holocaust education experts, and assists the Department of Education. You know, you did mention, Doug, that Florida is, you know, a trailblazer when it comes to Holocaust education. My word, but that's essentially what you're saying, is a leader when it, and that is true. You know, one of the first states in the country to mandate Holocaust education, that was in the early 90s by statute, became the first state. Was it 3 years ago now? COVID totally messes up my 3 years. I think it was 3 years ago now. Florida became the first state to establish standards for how the Holocaust is taught, because even in good faith, these are such complicated themes. And can you imagine a teacher trying to teach these things without any real instruction as to how to do it? I mean, Ursula, how many teachers have you trained in your career? But I mean, we do a ton of it at the museum, but you know, there's a lot of teachers, a lot of schools out there. So
standards will be implemented in this school year.
correct. This is the first year that the standards are actually being implemented. There's also legislation that was recently passed that's going to require the school districts to report, and that gets right to your question, to report to the Department of Education their progress. So some of this stuff's brand new in terms of creating measurable goals, but they're there now. And those are things that weren't there before. So steps are continuing to be taken in order to be able to, I think, better answer your question. For years, and in most other, if every other state, it is what we normally refer to as an unfunded mandate, meaning it says in the statute, teachers in public schools, you need to teach this. Have fun. I mean, that's how it works. So thankfully, the institutions like the museum are here to be able to provide teachers with those resources, nationally recognized curriculum, if I might say. But now again, more steps are being taken to help refine what that is and how it's done. And even that's not perfect yet, but it's a start. And there was a lot of work done on the standards, and not everybody agreed with each other. But that's, you know, in the long run, that's good. That's how you make things better. So it's here, and it's going to continue to evolve and continue to improve. On the second item, you know, with St. Pete City Council, I do want to clarify an extremely important item. Several members of the City Council were very much understood what was happening and were very vocal in their opposition to what was happening. And I think that's important to note. There were several. It was a very close vote, and that in and of itself is very disappointing and unfortunate and frustrating. But we move on, you know, because we have to. But education. I think one of we're fighting against time with survivors and liberators, because the liberators are so important too, and their stories and experiences are a huge part of this museum as well. The people who actually went in and liberated the camps, huge part of what we do as well. You know, they're passing more and more every single day. And so we're in a race against time, but we're also in a fight against apathy. People, they don't care. And I'll tell you from, you know, part of the discussions we were having, you know, when all of this was going on, and how do we continue to galvanize the community, to educate the community about this in a very short period of time. And there were lots of things we were all working together to try to do that. It wasn't about a fight. It was about educating people, arming them with information to help them. Most people care. They just kind of don't know how, they don't know what to do with that. They don't know how to. And so we try to help with that through these incredible stories, and also just sometimes even more forcefully. But one of the things we talked about was we need to make sure, Doug, you mentioned that Louis Farrakhan is not only probably the most famous current anti-Semite in the country, but also very anti-homosexual. And one of the things we talked about was, well, we need to make sure to galvanize the gay community, because people care about that more than they do about anti-Semitism. And we had to recognize that and say, well, we got to get a lot of people to care. How do we do that quickly? You know, and that's just a reality. But I think, and that's something that but education, the more people we talk to and the more people we educate, the more that's going to change. So it's one person at a time and one day at a time. All the way at the beginning, the statement was made, even tonight is another step forward. And you have to look at it that way. If we try to take the biggest bite out of the apple, we won't take any bite. We just got to keep going and keep doing this with consistency. We'll tell you from the people that are, you know, I'm just a volunteer. These are the people getting it done. It's frustrating a lot. And it's emotional and it's sad. And when we had the anti-Semitic graffiti here, you can imagine how that felt. It was like happening in my home. And it stinks. But every one of those things is an opportunity. The amount of attention that was paid when the city council battle was going on also provided us with an opportunity, not only publicly in the media to try to respectfully educate on this subject, but also working with the city council to help them, the members who didn't, to help them understand why this is important. And strides are being made. So you've got it. The one thing you can't do is say, I quit. And that's why I look at that. You know, people ask me a lot, especially when something bad happens, which is too frequent. How does it feel? And I'm always like, okay, how do you think? You know, but at the same time, I say, I do not spend a lot of time on negative feelings because it doesn't do anything. So I immediately say, okay, Mike, but how are you going to lead the community and the museum through this? How are you going to turn this into an opportunity? And the scrapper in me says, I want you to get to a point where you're almost ready to thank the person who did whatever they did because of the opportunity that you were able to make for the community about it. That's the attitude we have to take because the stuff's not going to go away. So we just need to be louder. You said the light shines brighter than the darkness. That's true. There's more of us. We have to remember that. We just have to be together and make noise about it.
Okay, at this point, I want to thank the panel and ask for a round of applause for all their done. Thank you all for coming. And thank you for coming. I think you've heard some of the speakers talk about how important it is to stay connected, stay informed, to, you know, teach the lessons, think about the museum, think about their education programs. And we appreciate everybody for coming tonight. So thank you.